Teachers, what was the best smartass response from a student you have heard? Story number 1. Let me point out that I'm female since people will assume I'm a guy. I taught in an inner city school. We were talking about prime numbers, so I would have kids give me a number and we'd work out if the number was a prime number on the board. One kid wasn't paying attention, so me being a young teacher, I thought I'd catch him off guard and call on him. It went something along the lines of, "Mark, do you have a number?" "Huh? I need your number." "Shit. Play it cool, girl. We can talk after class." The whole room lost their shit, and I turned red from embarrassment. They then laughed at how red I got. Story 2. This is sort of a flip from the question, but there was this awesome history teacher I had freshman year of high school who was just always in an amazing mood. We'll call him Mr. Smith. One day everyone is sitting in class waiting for the tardy bell to ring when a kid sneaks a condom into the door handle. The bell rings and Mr. Smith walks into the room, grabs the handle to close the door and pulls the condom off of it. Looks at the condom helmet for a split second and stuffs it into his pocket while saying, "Thanks, I'll need this later." Story 3. I had a teacher tell a classmate, "No drinks in class." He got up from his seat, picked up the teacher's drink and deposited it in the garbage with his drink. She sent him to the office. Story 4. Not me, but a colleague told me this story. It was one of his first years teaching, so he was about 22, 24 at the time. It was a junior high school science class and he told a student to stop messing around and get back to work. The student's response? "Man, I got bitches older than you. All I'm looking at right now is a bitch younger than me. Back to work." Story 5. My history teacher would spend half the class making jokes directed at the students. One student in particular always took the jokes on the chin and never really made any comebacks. Eventually, the teacher called him out and jokingly lectured him about standing up for himself. He ended his rant with, "You've got to be a man. You've got to be like me." The student replied, "Well, which one? Do you want me to be a man or do you want me to be like you?" Story 6. I'm not a teacher, but I had a friend in school who was always pretty dramatic. She actually did have IBS though. So we're in this bitchy teacher's class and she keeps asking to use the bathroom. The teacher says no. My friend's like, "I have IBS though." And the teacher's like, "Tell me what those initials mean and I'll let you go." So she screams, "It means I have to shit," and takes out of the room. Story 7. Not a teacher, but witnessed it as a student. There were literally 30 seconds left of class and my buddy started to back up. The teacher didn't seem to mind, but when the bell rang and the buddy got up to leave, the teacher said the classic line, "The bell doesn't dismiss you, I do." And the buddy just continues to leave, getting in the doorway of the class and says, "If it decides when I come, it decides when I leave," and just leaves the class. Story 8. In high school, our functions and relations teacher would always start to say something, forget it, and say, I lost my train of thought. Well, one day a buddy of mine replies, "It's okay, sir. We're no important passengers on board." Story 9. I've told this story on Reddit before, but this really shy kid that doesn't really speak much was getting picked on by this mean girl. When the teacher tells her, "Be nice to him, he might be your boss someday." Without missing a beat, he replies, "No thanks, I don't want to be a pimp when I grow up." Story 10. In my chemistry class sophomore year, one of my friends was going through some family issues, and his dad just left for a year or so. The kid was acting up in class, and the teacher was like, "Do you want me to call your dad?" And he was like, "If he picks up, tell him to come home soon." Story 11. I had a friend who told the teacher he wasn't going to be able to come to an after-school event. She started fussing at him, telling him that he wouldn't ever make it to college because of how irresponsible he was. When she finally asked why he couldn't come, he replied, "My house burned down." Story 12. I had a woman accuse me of sexual harassment in a French class for civil servants. We were just casually trying to have a conversation in French when the teacher asks me, in French, "Have I ever eaten a beaver?" This was in Ottawa during Winterfest. They sell a pastry called a beaver tail. So I respond, in correct French, "What kind?" thinking of the animal or the pastry. Most people were laughing, and this one woman throws a book at me and stomps out of the class. I'm kind of wondering, what the fuck? When it dawns on me. Okay, oral sex on a woman. Anyhow, this woman reports me and tries to get me kicked out of the class. She ended up leaving the class and I found out later she was notorious for bringing sexual harassment suits against fellow employees. I like how it's not okay for you to offend her, but it's perfectly okay for her to throw a book at you. No big deal, right? Story 13. This isn't going to be as good when spoken out loud, But I had a friend who got into an argument with their teacher about the whole I before E except after the C thing. And if it sounds like an A, it's A. My friend told his teacher that it wasn't always true. So she got defensive and started going off about her lit degree and how she knows more than him. His response was, "No, seriously, there are some weird words where that rule doesn't apply." She kept saying it wasn't true, and he kept saying the same thing over and over. There are some weird words where they don't apply. He did like 5 times, and finally she snapped and yelled, "Like what?" He just yells, "Weird." She permanently kicked him out of her class for being a smartass. Well, that's a pretty weird reason to kick someone out. Story 14. I wasn't in class, but my buddy swears that one time his history teacher called a student's mother because he was sleeping in class. He said the teacher got all the parents' numbers at the beginning of the year. I went to a mostly black school, and evidently, this kid had one of those stern black moms. Anyway, the teacher doesn't say a word to the kid, who was asleep. He quietly told the mom he was sleeping in class and would she like to have a word with him about that. He holds the cell phone to the kid's ear and she f***ing goes off. My buddy said you could hear her across the room. That poor kid spent the rest of the day walking the Green Mile. I can imagine the black mom's voice right now. Story 15. This is one of my favorite stories from high school. I'm not a teacher, but this is a story about my teacher's response to one particular smartass answer. So my high school mythology teacher, Mr. D, would have his honors class students help him grade tests from the other classes. He would always require proper spelled right-in answers. No multiple choices for him. So he'd get the tests, he'd read off the answers, and we'd mark them accordingly. One of his questions was, who was the wife of King Minos? Now, according to our Greek lore, Pasiphae, Minos' wife, was the one who had sex with a bull and gave birth to the Minotaur. So Mr. D tells us that the answer is Pasiphae, and one of the students kinda timidly raises his hand. Mr. D goes, "What you got?" They wrote bull slut. The class breaks into laughter. Mr. D grins and thinks about it for a second. I like it. Have credit. That's why he was everyone's favorite teacher. Good sense of humor. And the fact that the answerer knew that Minos' wife was the one who birthed the Minotaur meant that at least some of the mental connections were there. So they got the credit. Great guy. Story 16. I'm a diving coach and have 4 divers I'm responsible for, so I don't usually get swimmers' contact info. We were on our way to a meet and one of our swimmers was not on the bus. I said, "Who has Redacted's number?" No one. So obviously I got mad. "This is your teammate, and not one of you girls has her phone number to text her?" So one of my divers chimed in. "Why don't you, coach?" I said, "I have 4 divers. I don't need another 30 high school girls' numbers in my phone." She replied, "You wish." Easily the best burn of my coaching career. Story 17. When I was in my practice teaching placement, I was teaching a class of about 15 grade 9 students with various learning needs. Most of them had difficulty focusing. There was a pretty strict routine in class, starting with 15 minutes of silent reading. There was a book room, a big closet filled with books, attached to the classroom, and my associate teacher said that if anyone is having trouble staying on task, I could send them to the book room to be away from their peers. One student was acting up, and after the first 2 reminders to stay on task, I said, "This is your final warning. Next time I speak to you, you will be moved to the book room." The student looked up at me with a mock frightened expression and said, "Not the book room, miss. Dark things happen in there." Then he shuddered and stared at me with large frightened eyes until I started to laugh. The class laughed so hard because they had been trying to push buttons all week to get me to lighten up a bit. That is one of the key moments in my practice teaching because that's when I stopped being so nervous about classroom management. Thanks for being a smartass, kid. Story 18. I spent years waiting to use a line on a teacher, and I finally did it in grade 10. I was always late to class, just kind of happened, wasn't a hooligan. And I always had a response in my head for when a teacher would say, "You're late." Although none of them ever did. They all just accepted it. But one day, I was late to English class and my teacher looked at me and asked me why I was late, to which my response was, "A wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to." My teacher, who was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, laughed and told me to sit down. I don't know how that kind of savage can still be a virgin.
What was the most awkward thing you witnessed in a school classroom? Not safe for work. Story 1. I was swimming in our school's pool and cut my foot pretty badly on the diving board. I didn't notice it was bleeding until I got out and walked over to the diving board again, leaving little blood spots wherever my foot touched. The teacher stopped everyone and made us all hold still while he searched out who was getting blood all over. With the pool area in dead silence, he followed it over to me, who had just noticed it and had realized that this was coming from my foot, and said loudly, "Waddick, if you're gonna menstruate in my class, would you please have the decency to plug it up?" Like some sort of wannabe comedian who was modeling a style of humor after the Carrie movie. I got tampons thrown at me for 2 years at that school, and pads constantly stuck to my locker, all clean except for one, inexplicably. Story 2. Back in the 6th grade, I had a kid who would always cause trouble and tried to be the center of attention all the time. Well, this kid had a weird way of flirting with girls, whether it would be to shoot spitballs at them or pour water onto them. One day, he told all his friends that he will literally shit his pants during class in order to show off to the girls. During class, we can hear giggling, and it began to smell like actual shit. Everyone looked at him because he was sitting in the back of the class, and he stands up while laughing and says, "Teacher, I need to go to the bathroom. I accidentally shit my pants," with shit running down his legs as he walks out of the class, laughing hysterically, as if he had just won the Nobel Prize or something. By the way, he was never popular with the girls. I don't understand. How could this fail? Story 3. In 2nd grade of high school, a student flipped the F off and started throwing chairs and his desk at the teacher because he was refused a test reprisal upon failing it the first time. Shit got super scary. He was yelling like crazy, and the female teacher was trying to protect herself from the things thrown at her. Another teacher next door barged in, grabbed the enraged student, nailed him onto the floor face down, and tied his feet and arms together with his belt and shoelace. I remember him being taken away and we never saw him again. I think the teachers ate him. Story 4. In my high school economics class, a girl was called to the office with her things rather suddenly. About 2 minutes later, she comes bursting into the room and yells, "My dad just died." The teacher immediately went to her to try and console her as she was justifiably distressed. Everyone in the room was in complete shock. She then yelled at the teacher to get off of her, and she threw her arm back and almost hysterically darted around the room. Eventually, her family members came to the room and got her. We could hear her sobbing down the hall. It was one of the craziest and most heart-wrenching things I had ever seen in the class. The second most awkward thing involved the same girl about a year earlier. She nearly tried to fight our English literature teacher while he was dressed in a formal kilt and jacket. I don't remember why. She had to be escorted out by security. Story 5. So part of my job at the time had me meeting with teachers and schools to discuss alternative programs for the students. One of the teachers had been working there for 20 plus years. She had job security and would tell exactly what she thought. It leads to some awkward exchanges when discussing students. Things like, "Oh, he's crazier than a shithouse rat. You don't want him in a place without heavy security." The most awkward, however, was when she said, "She really gets around for a girl with one arm, like a slot machine that pays out in blood." Story 6. This mentally handicapped kid in my class named Mark was always super infatuated with this really smart, nice girl in our class. He would always talk about how he was going to make her his girlfriend, and she was always just too nice to him to tell if it was going to happen. This went on for years. Anyways, one day, someone thought it would be funny to tell Mark I was dating the love of his life. I wasn't. Mark flipped his shit and found me in the hallway and pushed me up against this giant topographical plaster map of Alberta. The Rocky Mountains cut into my back as he pushed me harder into it and yelled into my face while crying about how Tessa was his girlfriend and I need to leave her alone. I told him I wasn't dating her and he ran off crying. Poor guy. Story 7. I had an English teacher who was admittedly a fat kid back in his high school days. He had a certain swagger/inexplicably mean and attention-seeking way about him that told us every day was a chance to act out his mean girl fantasies that he couldn't achieve as a once bullied 240 shorty. He lost all his weight and was now a tall, lean dude. He even took up hip-hop classes and would sometimes bust out moves just for the class. I fucking hated this guy. One day, he strode up to a girl in our class who was devastatingly beautiful, but was also a pretty kick-ass girl power kind of chick. She was doodling while he was lecturing, so he picked up her pencil bag, she was artistic and her bag was full of supplies, and dumped it onto the ground smirking. This badass bitch looks him dead in the eye and says, Pick it up. He scoffs. No. She goes, that was completely inappropriate. Pick it up or I'm going straight to the principal and explaining how you just dumped my personal belongings onto the ground and tried to humiliate me. The class was dead silent watching this, and after a few more tense moments, he slowly bends down and picks everything up. It took him a while, and it was the most cringy, most awkward thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Story 8. I was in the 9th grade and there was a girl in my classroom who broke both of her arms, so she had them in the cast that held her arms above her waist. Now, this girl wasn't exactly the most popular as she was the best friend with another girl who was equally as awkward as she was. I will never forget when my best friend raised her hand to get the attention of the teacher. The teacher called on the best friend and she asked if she and her broken-armed friend could use the restroom together. And the teacher asks, why would you need to go together? She replies, I have to unzip and take off her pants. Looking back, I can understand that she just wanted to help her friend use the restroom, but imagine being in the 9th grade and you hear this. Everyone in the classroom was silent and then one kid just started laughing. Then everyone started laughing, and that is how the lesbian rumors started about these two. High school can be a bit. Story 9. I was in the 9th grade, so 14/15 years old at the time. We were having a sex education class and a big group of us. We were given a bunch of sex words on paper, like veg sex, oral sex, kissing, and stuff like that. I got We had to line up in order from least likely to spread diseases to most likely. Well, I had so I stood at the end where I was least likely to transmit a disease to someone. When we were done, the teacher looked at it and asked me, is it with just yourself or others? Well, I only by myself, so it's just with myself. The laughter was awful. The moment I said it, I could see the regret on the teacher's face for making an already awkward boy even more awkward. Story 10. I used to substitute teach after college. A quick realization that I wasn't cut out for elementary-aged children, or kids in general, happened one day while subbing for a kindergarten class. After lunch, the kids are crazy with energy. I see one boy tugging on another boy's arm in a romantic way, trying to pull the boy under a table. I approach to separate the two when I turn around and see the two boys exposing themselves to a little girl underneath the table across the room. I freak out and scream, "Whoa! Stop! Everybody stop!" Silence in the room, except for the arm tugger boy who was now climbing on top of his buddy he pulled underneath the table and is caressing the face of said victim. I called the principal down to deal with everything, and a little girl urinates herself from her desk out of fear of the principal and counselors being in the room. This was my last day ever substitute teaching. Story 11. I was on the first day of PE class with a classically intense coach. He bounced students out of the first week with ease. This one kid didn't follow his instructions, so he told them to get out. The kid remains silent and doesn't budge. The teacher comes up and starts yelling at him to leave. The kid walks up in his face and doesn't move. The entire class is watching, just wondering if this is how we all die. Eventually, he walked out, but it was uncomfortable as fuck. What? The story wasn't good enough? Okay, fine. Here's the alternative ending. Then the kid exploded into moths and swarmed all the light sources, inducing total blackness. We all ran, and to this day that classroom is quarantined because it's still black with moths. I hope this makes it up to all of you who expected something crazier to go down. Story 12. In 7th grade, there was a girl that was known for doing all kinds of weird shit. She cut a chunk of her hair off and left it on my friend's desk as a birthday present, meowed at people, and cried when anyone stepped on a bug. The most awkward incident happened when she dropped her pencil during a test. I guess she was too shy to ask the person next to her for it, so she tried to stretch for it and ended up flipping her desk over. She then continued to do her test with her desk sideways for another 10 minutes, while the teacher told another student to flip her over. Story 13. There was this couple in my math class who had broken up. The guy sat behind the girl for the rest of the year. One day, John goes to the washroom, and while he is out, some guy who sits close to him opens his bag and quietly starts pulling out his contents and very quietly placing them on his desk. There are the usual things, and then there's a bottle of hand lotion, some 8x10 glossies of his ex, and some other pictures of her. Those get piled onto the desk too. John returns, sees the items on the desk, and loses his mind, starts swearing. And now everyone is looking over, including his ex, who says, "What the f***? I thought you said you gave all those back." Everyone sees what she's looking at. It was very uncomfortable. Story 14. We had one of those strange/quiet kids at school that everyone would verbally abuse. One day he showed up with 4 long scratch marks on the side of his face. These were pretty raw and were scabbing up. The kids were making fun of him. "Hey Matt, did you have a rough date last night? Hey Matt, you're supposed to jack off to your dick, not your head." This went on for a couple of days. Then we find out the kid had taken a butcher knife to his piano teacher during a lesson and chopped the hell out of her. They found her body on the floor of the kitchen, nude and mutilated. A bottle of wine and 2 wine glasses are on the counter. He came to school for 2 days afterward while she lay on the floor rotting. She had been sexually abusing him for weeks and he finally snapped. Poor kid. He got off on self-defense and he and his family went underground after that. Name change and everything. Story 15. We had a math teacher that was a bit effeminate, so naturally students spread the rumors that he was gay. He had some of those really long rulers in the class, and one day a ruler toppled over neatly into the crack of his ass as he was leaning down to help a student. He let out a surprised "ooh" sound. We all laughed, and the poor guy was subjected to even more rumors and jokes. We also had a substitute teacher who we referred to as Pierce Brosnan. He looked like the actor, but with a huge scar on his face. He was notoriously known for smelling like chicken tikka. Kids in the class would drive him batshit crazy to the point where he'd slam his hands on the desk and yell "shut up" at the top of his lungs. Of course, this only encouraged kids to tease him more. Oh, another one. We had this really awesome French teacher. He'd bring in French candy, tell us stories about how when he was young, and all around was just a great teacher, aside from his temper. There was this bastard of a kid in my class who would wind up the class. One day our teacher had enough of it. He threw his whiteboard pen at the floor as hard as he could, slowly walked up to the kid maintaining eye contact the entire time, and verbally tore him to shreds. The kid was crying and red-faced, complete with snot trails, as he was sent out of the room. Nobody dared breathe as our teacher slowly walked towards the pen he had thrown. He picked it up and casually said, "Oops, I broke the pen." The class giggled, but those were some intense minutes. Story 16. I went to school with this kid. I think his name was Matt. Matt was in a wheelchair, but he was a fucking dickhead. He used to sing and sink in the hallway and run into girls with his wheelchair. You could tell he was socially fucked up from being the wheelchair kid, but you could also tell that he knew how to play the wheelchair card like a champ. Eventually, the school started giving him punishments for being such a douchebag. So I'm in the in-school suspension room, and it's fucking packed because the in-school suspension is awesome, and there was a substitute that day. Matt's in there too, and he was being a dick, but then quieted down. So I'm sitting there, probably a little stoned, and I see Matt start rolling toward the door super slowly. I look over at a teacher, and she has her head down, probably doing a little self-loathing, because who the f wants to be the in-school suspension teacher? And so I looked back, and he keeps rolling closer and closer to the door. I give him the look. I co-sign this shit. He grabs the handle, and that's when the teacher looks up. He fucking bolted out of the room. The teacher yells, runs out into the hallway, and he's nowhere to be found. She gets on the phone and tells whoever that Matt just rolled out of the classroom. It was pretty awkward letting a kid in the wheelchair escape from the room. Story 17. I took JROTC, Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, in high school, instead of High School 101, so my instructor was responsible for sex education with us. On the first day of sex ed, as a way to break the ice, he had us write down every slang term for sex or sex things. Then he read them all aloud to us. I will never forget listening to a 50-plus-year-old Marine talk about pounding the paternal piston. Story 18. Freshman year of high school circa 1990. We had a new history teacher fresh out of college, and he quickly gained a reputation for being a pushover. He was also notorious for never looking at the class. If this kid was reading to us from a book, we might as well have all been smoking meth or something for all he knew. My class decided to do a cattle drive where we would all slowly scoot our desks toward him. Being the deviants that we were, we chose the day where he was being evaluated by the principal to do this. It didn't take long before we were finally at his feet. Some of the students even went past him and had their desks at the chalkboard. He never looked up from that book. The principal was not amused. She took him out in the hallway and chewed him out so loud the entire school heard. He came back into the classroom, looked at this carnage that we had created, loosened his tie, and left. Then he sat down at his desk and smoked a cigarette. He was fired at the end of the year. Story 19. This was in middle school. The bell went off to go to our next class, and I noticed a girl had blood on her light-colored blue jeans. Even with me being the kind of boy that no girl would ever talk to if she wanted to keep what little status she might have had with other girls in the school, I took the risk that might come with having a conversation with the girl. I quickly walked right behind her, like creeper close, and put my hands on her shoulder to get her to slow down a little, and I leaned in and whispered into her ear, "You have blood on your pants. I will follow you to the girls' restroom. Just act normal," and took my hands off her shoulder. She never looked back, she didn't say a word, and we walked nearly bumper to bumper to the girls' bathroom. I kept on walking past and off to my next class. I never spoke to her again. I don't remember her face or her name anymore, but I wonder sometimes if I had crossed the line between creeper and kindness. Story 20. One time, one of my friends was emptying out his backpack on his desk looking for his phone, when the teacher noticed he had Midol, period relief medication, in his bag. The teacher asked him why he had it, and that he said it was for headaches, not knowing its main purpose. Everyone in the class, including the teacher, burst out laughing, and quickly told him what it was really for. It was really only awkward for him, but I guess it was funny as hell. Also, I talked to him later, and he said the real reason he had it was because he had a drug test coming up and he smoked pot a week before, and he read that Midol could cleanse your system to pass the test. Obviously, he didn't want to tell the teacher this, so he said it was for headaches, lol. Edit. So apparently it's actually good for headaches, but I'm pretty sure he had no clue. Also, the teacher really hated this kid, rightfully so. Also, this wasn't the first time he'd been the center of attention either, so he was used to it. Story 21. I remember a substitute teacher that we had for a few days when I was in middle school. She was pretty overweight, and one day she grabbed a chair from an empty desk to help someone out with their assignment when suddenly we heard a loud crash. One of the legs of the chair had broken, and she was flat on her back. It was hard not to laugh, but what made it even worse was that as she was getting up, she ended up farting very loudly. The entire class erupted in a fit of laughter, and she had to leave the classroom because she was so embarrassed. Story 22. In high school, there was a science teacher that was a real fuckwad. I had him once as a substitute the previous semester, and I prayed I never got him. The following semester, I end up getting this guy, and we had a project that's due in a week. His deal is that you have 3 days after the date to hand it in. If you do not, you fail the semester. I fall heavily ill the last week and missed handing it in and barely making it to school to hand it in on the 3rd day. I approach him and he yells at the top of his lungs, "I don't have time for this, goodbye," and slams the door in my face. The following week, I'm sitting in the cafeteria with a few friends discussing teachers, and I'm reminded how I have this guy's class today. I start going full Nazi, explaining how I hope this cocksucker chokes on dick and dies to my fellow juniors. 2 minutes later, there's an announcement telling everyone that he died last night. Awkwardness ensues. Story 23. My school was going through a pantsing epidemic. It means pulling down a person's trousers and/or underwear against their wishes. On one particular day, we had just finished a particularly vicious game of rugby during our PE class. My friend was tackled with the force of a 6-foot, 14-year-old juggernaut, who had a tendency to grab the back of your shorts and yank them high into the pooper. A reverse pantsing wedgie, if you will. After the game, my friend realized that his boxers were bloody and poopy, so he chose not to wear them, and just put his trousers back on. We were in math class later that day, and he was called right into the front of the class to write something on the board. The teacher left the room for a moment when disaster struck, and to the surprise of no one, another kid solid snaked his way into the board and yanked my friend's trousers down to his ankles, butt-ass naked. His immediate response is to turn to face the class, his little bishop in a turtleneck staring everyone down. Immediately followed by a wad of poopy, bloody tissue falling out from his butt cracks, like a makeshift tampon for a brutal rugby butt rape. Then our teacher comes back, who safely assumes this guy is making some sort of statement to the class and sent him to the principal to be punished.
Teachers of Reddit, what is your best read the note to the class story? Story 1. My then fiancée was a high school math teacher. One day she thought she saw a note being passed. She wasn't sure, so she waited. Then she thought she saw it again. Finally she saw it, walked over, and took it. It was a wedding card, signed by half of the class before she took it. She cried. Story 2. 11th grade physics class. I teach math, but I was assigned to be present in the class for supervision. In that school, new teachers get to have a more experienced one in the classroom. I was standing at the back of the class when I saw 2 kids passing around notes and said, "You want to read that out loud or maybe give it to me? I could use something to read." to help out the one guy not having to deal with it and continue the lesson. That didn't happen though. The boys started laughing, which makes the class and I laugh as well. Damn the infectious laughter. Instead of giving the paper straight to me, I didn't expect them to read it. The boy opens the note and takes a deep breath. He reads out loud, "Imagine everybody tied to the spring is a slice of ham." Everyone lost it. It was such a random thing to say. I believe the physics teacher still has the note. Story 3. Not really a note, but when I was teaching college classes, I caught two of the girls whispering. So I told them, if you're going to tell secrets, you need to share with the rest of the class. I taught preschool before this. She looked right at me and said, without the slightest embarrassment, I was just telling her that I think you have a cute butt. I was teaching a communications class and we were discussing communications in the workplace, and I looked down at the textbook. After seeing what the next section was, I said, okay, moving on to the next section titled Sexual Harassment. Everyone roared with laughter. A couple of weeks later at a baseball game paid for by the school, she came onto me really hard with my fiancé right there. Story 4. When I was in high school, we had a kid pass a note to another kid all subtly. Both sat behind me in the same row. The kid did not even read it. He put it in his pocket, but the teacher saw. She made him stand up and told him to pull out the note. He refused. She told him to pull out the note again, and he refused. She legit reached into his pocket and said something like, "Let's see what you are hiding from the class." She saw the contents and went white. She grabbed both boys and led them to the office immediately. The note, which I later found out, said something along the lines of, "Package left in second trash can of the third empty room," or something like that. With the gun. You won't need it. Don't fuck this up. The police found a small amount of heroin and a .22 pistol with no ammo in the said trash can, underneath some balled-up papers. This turned into a mess where the kids both claimed neither one wrote the note and were not the intended recipient. So the school said they would expel everyone from that line of desks, which our parents pretty much stopped. The police tried searching all of our homes, but my parents refused to allow anyone into our home. I was in a band at the time, and I had to take a drug test every 6 months. My parents believed me, so they refused to allow the police to search my home. The event never got punished because they could never prove anything other than the teacher saw two kids pass a note. About 4 years after graduation, I saw on MySpace, yep, that long ago, that one of them died of an OD and the other was arrested for his murder. They never got him for the murder of supplying drugs to a drug, but did get him on a drug charge. Story 5. Not a teacher, but something one of my teachers told me outside of school. The students were learning about the properties of rocks and minerals. The first student wrote, "What's cleavage?" on a note, referencing the mineral property. The second student responded with, "A human anatomy description." Story 6. I taught for a decade in a really rough area. I intercepted a lot of notes and was pretty shameless in the public humiliation of my kids. I read a lot of bad stuff out loud. However, one really nice moment that stands out was when the super popular bubbly Latina girl sat next to the stereotype depressed weird white theater band girl. I see them passing notes, which is really uncharacteristic. The band girl seems off and upset, but I let it go because it seemed like there was something going on. And the Latina girl was a really nice kid. Didn't think she was bullying or anything. I had the girls stay after for a second and asked them what's up. The Latina girl said, "I was worried about her. She looked sadder than usual, so I wanted to make sure she's cool." I asked the other girl if that's what's happening, and she said yep, and showed me the notes, which was a real heartfelt conversation about boys, relationships, and feeling lonely. It was so damned sweet. I asked if they needed more time, and they both said yes. I could get them excused from their next class and asked if they could chill and talk more. I said sure, because you bet your ass wellness and mental health is more important than curriculum. They really had a moment, and it seemed to help them both. This was as 10th graders. I got to see them really develop a nice friendship over the next few years. Go girls! Wherever you are now, I hope you're still friends, and I'm glad I could help facilitate that. Story 7. I'm the student in the story, not the teacher. Yeah, I know, but my current students all text or message on their laptops rather than passing physical notes. In the 7th grade science class, my friend and I passed notes to each other through the guys sitting between us. Our teacher caught one of the boys with the note, but knew it wasn't him because it had enough doodles of hearts and flowers on it. She opened it up to read to the class to catch whoever did write it. However, the note was written completely in Tolkien's Elvish alphabet, and she couldn't read a word. Most of the class knew that it had to be me and my friend, because we were the only Lord of the Rings nerds in the class obsessed enough to teach ourselves the Elfish alphabet. But thankfully, no one ratted us out. We were hoping that writing notes in Elvish would keep the boys from reading about my friend's massive crush on one of them, but it ended up also saving us from getting in trouble. Story 8. I don't know if this is the best, but it's pretty profound. I usually ignored note passing. If a student didn't want to pay attention but wasn't bothering anyone else, I was cool. In the age of cell phones, notes were kind of outdated anyway. So I had this student who could do origami like a boss, and he was always making all kinds of animal figures and cool shapes that I would put on my corkboard behind my desk. This one day, he is getting his fold on and is completely focused on not paying attention. Before I know it, class is over and it's on my desk. He stops on the way out of my class and says, "You're gonna want to read that." I read it, and he asked for lunch money because his mom took off and he was hungry. It hurts being a teacher some days. Story 9. I was in 8th grade and it was a hot sunny day in mid-May. I wrote, "It's snowing" on a piece of paper and showed it to my friend sitting next to me, who immediately looked out the window. We both laughed because obviously it wasn't snowing. Then he and I laughed when I showed it to another student and they immediately looked out the window, and so on until most of the class is in on the joke and watching as I show the piece of paper to the next unwitting fool. Almost every student knows what's going on. When my teacher sees that I'm showing this piece of paper to everyone and making them laugh, she walks over to my desk, looks down at the piece of paper and says, "It's snowing," and instinctively looks out the window. The entire class bursts out in laughter. Story 10. I am not a teacher, but I have a story that was kind of the opposite. When I was in college, I was in a large math lecture hall 2 times a week. Me and my friends took to making paper planes and throwing them down from the back of a theater. We did it often, and I'm sure we thought we were hilarious. Somehow, nobody said a word except for the occasional snicker, and it went on like that, on and off for the semester. Then, on the last day, I remember writing "Happy Christmas, Dr. Jones" on a plane and throwing it down, seeing it land in front of the lecturer. He blew a fuse and started shouting about how this had been going on all semester, and he thought it was just a disgrace. Then he picked up the plane and read the message, got very embarrassed, and meekly said, "Thank you." I still cringe to think of my childish actions, but it did give me that moment of connection with the lecturer before failing his class. Story 11. Another non-teacher here. But my 7th grade teacher typically always wore a dress shirt to class and looked very presentable. But this day, he had his sleeves rolled up. Now everyone loved this teacher, but my immediate thought was to write a note to my friend sitting beside me that his arms were super hairy. And that note was passed back and forth with us cracking jokes about it. Nothing malicious or overly mean, just that we didn't think he'd have such hairy arms. We eventually got caught, and between classes, he took us aside and wanted us not to pass notes. And since this was the first time this happened, he would toss it out without reading it and let us go. Well, a couple of months go by and he decides to wear short sleeves again, and his arms were noticeably less hairy. I know 12-year-olds don't have the greatest moral compass, but to this day, I still feel so bad that my dumbass little note might have made him so self-conscious about something so unimportant. I'm sorry, Mr. Fifield, wherever you are now. Story 12. Was the student not the teacher? In 3rd grade, 1996, my class was performing a play. I had a total of 2 lines of dialogue, but I really wanted to get it right. So I copied my lines from the textbook, folded it up, and stuck it in my pocket. The teacher only saw the last bit of this, but assumed I was sticking a note in my pocket and told me to get up in front of the class and read it out loud. I recited my lines verbatim and handed the note to the teacher. Without reading it, she assumed I was being a smartass and sent me to the principal's office where I received recess detention and a call to my parents. Not sure why I never asked anyone to read the note, but I didn't. The next day, when I arrived at school, my teacher pulled me aside and told me that she had read the note, realized what it was, and apologized profusely. She took me down to the office to call my parents and let me go out for 2 periods of recess. Props Mrs. W for the life lesson about humility and doing the right thing. I still remember. Story 13. Not a note, but an anonymous question to the class. In health class in freshman year of high school, we had to anonymously write questions about sexuality and the reproductive process, and the teacher would pull out a random card, read the question, and respond with a textbook answer. Said teacher was very religious and very open about her faith in a way that almost seemed patronizing. So I was surprised when she pulled out and read a card that said, "What does the word cunt mean?" She looked at the card, looked at us all calmly, and then proceeded to pull up Wikipedia and other web media to inform us of the origin of the word, its connotation, and how it's used differently around the world. I was kind of shocked that she just wanted to know what it meant, as if to say, don't look like a dumb person if you want to use this word in a sentence. Story 14. One day in middle school, right around when the Nintendo Wii came out, you could add other friends online for certain compatible online Wii games by sharing a serial code of like 16 numbers or something around there. Sitting in the back of our 7th period class, 3 of my friends and I started to exchange and write down our Wii serial codes on a small piece of paper. We'd pass it down and share it as we passed it and copy them in our notebooks. Our teacher pauses his lecture and looks at us. He just gets up from the front of the class, walked to our row, where the 4 of us sat, put his hand out to my buddy for the paper with all of our serial codes on it, takes a moment to glance at it only to see a matrix of numbers followed by the first letter of our names. Then he glances up at us and then at my buddy with the most dumbfounded stare, squints, and asks, "Is this some kind of joke? 'Cause I'm clueless on this one." My buddy, who had to explain ourselves, saved us all the embarrassment and said, "I'll explain after the class," as he blushed. Luckily, our teacher was a really cool dude and was fine with that answer and told us to just put it away. We told him after class and he understood, but also said he was expecting some sort of elaborate code that we were encrypting messages in. Story 15. Student, not teacher. In my college thermodynamics class, the professor said that he didn't care if we got a text message in class. However, he did care if we had our ringers on us. So his rule was that if you got a text message and your phone went off loud enough for the whole room to hear it, you had 2 options. You could either read the text out loud to the whole class, or you could bring in donuts for everyone at the next class. There were about 20 of us. Of course, everyone keeps their phones on silent, so it never happens. Until smack dab in the middle of one of the exams, when the professor's phone gets a text message and rings out loud and clear in the middle of the exam. Professor freezes, takes one look at his phone as we all start giggling and says, "Guess I'm bringing you all donuts on Wednesday." They were delicious. Story 16. I was actually the note passer in question that got caught. In 8th grade, a buddy and I were passing notes talking about the events happening that weekend. Local Smash and Halo tournament. The teacher caught me passing back, but just took the paper and didn't force me to read it. Lo and behold, the next morning, I got called down to the office. The teacher, who was a fairly old civics teacher, vice principal, school nurse, and my woodshop teacher, who is 27 at the oldest, were all in the office around me. The VP starts off by asking me if I'm okay and if I need help. Everyone looks super worried except the woodshop teacher, who is clearly holding in laughter. Unbeknownst to me, my edgy dumbass used a sheet of paper that has song lyrics to a Slipknot song on the other side. I used to write song lyrics for my favorite songs when I was bored in class. Ends up, most Slipknot songs, when taken out of context by people who are too old to know that the band sound really troubling, especially that relatively new song at the time, Wait and Bleed. I tried explaining to them that I'm fine and it was legit just a song by a band. I proceeded to show them all the song lyrics by various bands in my notebooks. Nope, they still didn't believe me. Then my workshop teacher finally burst out laughing. It ends up he's been trying to explain the exact same thing as I said to them for the past half hour. Eventually, we both convinced them all was fine. But damn, one perk out of all of this, found out that day my favorite teacher was a fan of metal. Story 17. Had a coworker, also a teacher, see a pair of girls hunched over in class and giggling. She walks over to them and sees them doodling. She takes it from them and looks at it. They're beef red and shocked. The teacher holds the paper and says to the class, "What in the world? I can't believe this. Girls, this is not okay." The girls are stammering and red. The teacher marches to the front of the room towards her camera projector, continues, "Can you believe it, class? Can you believe what the girls were drawing?" The class is on the edge of their seats, and the girls are almost crying like, "No, don't project it, please." She slaps it on the overhead projector. There it is. A giant balls and everything for all the 8th graders to see. Before anyone can react, she says, "Now who dare doodle rocket ships in my class?" Class stunned. Girls stunned. Don't know what to say. She knows what she did. Story 18. I've got a few, but the absolute best one was by a new student who didn't know my backstory with farting in that particular class. Okay, so I subbed in this long-term position. My class was 5th graders. The grip of it was, one day I farted in front of them. I was at the board and dropped a marker when a spontaneous fart just ripped into existence. It was long, loud, and ended in a toot. I was mortified, the class was shocked and incredulous, but then they started laughing and then I started laughing because what else can you do? It was funny and we were all in hysterics for a while. Of course, it became a funny thing to tell any new kid, most of whom also thought it was funny and liked that I was a good sport about it. Another new kid comes in one day, is told the fart story, and just scowled. No biggie, right? A week or so later, I had to correct him over whatever he was talking in class during a session or something. And he got so upset when told to stop and said, "I heard about you, you farter," which simply made me say, "So what? Shh." So he passed a note, making a big show so I'd see it. Eye roll. Sometimes you can end a perceived beef a kid has with you if you give them attention. So I grabbed the note and read it out loud. It said, "This bish booty stink." I started laughing and he started yelling about my fart and another boy shouted, "Whose booty don't stink when they fart?" Lost it. The class lost it. And we all just started cracking up again like on the day of the epic fart. A girl came to the front of the class to reenact it. She did my mannerisms and voice and facial expressions. It was glorious. I laughed until I cried, and the kids did too. The Grinch kid at the end gave in and started laughing too. So it turned out well for everyone. He also apologized. I kept that note for a few years. Anytime I was having a bad day, I'd read it and it always made me smile a bit. Story 19. Not a teacher, but one time when I was in 7th grade, my best friend and I was obsessed with Cobra Starship. They have this spoof of Hollaback Girl called Hollaback Boy that is riddled with expletives and a bunch of really crass phrases such as "get off my dick" and the like. We thought this song was the height of comedy. While dumbass 12-year-old thought it'd be funny to write out the entirety of the song and address it to my friend while singing my name at the bottom. I guess the note must have fallen out of my notebook and landed on the ground where an unlucky 6th grader found it and thought it was a hate note. She turned it into my French teacher, who was a real ass, and she subsequently turned it into the principal. The next morning, I'm called into the office to talk to her. I'd never been in trouble before, so I assumed it was no big deal that I was being called in. In the office is sitting my best friend along with her parents and my parents, looking all pissed. The principal then had to explain that we have a zero-tolerance policy on bullying and that I was to apologize to the poor girl, even though the note never made it to her and she was my best friend and it was a joke. I then kinda chuckled thinking, oh boy, are they gonna laugh about this? They did not. This made the principal even angrier, and I was suspended for 2 days and switched out of the only class I had with my best friend. Definitely never pulled that stuff again. My friend never let me live it down. Story 20. Student, not a teacher. In maybe the 4th or 5th grade, a kid is trying to pass me a note and is caught by the teacher. I wasn't paying attention to where it came from. I only noticed when it was about to be handed to me. She makes him read the note in front of the class. He reads the note and it says, "You want to be my boyfriend? I like the way your booty moves when you walk." I overreact and say, "I'm not gay." And the boy says, "I didn't write that it came from Tasha." Everyone laughs, and she and I are both extremely embarrassed. After class, I go talk to her at the locker, and she says, "Yeah, I wrote it, but I don't like you like that anymore." Legend has it I'm still single to this day.
What is the sickest burn you've seen a teacher give to a student? A friend of mine in high school needed to pass economics to graduate. I was sitting in the study hall with him when our economics teacher came in and sat down at our table. He was very serious and grabbed my friend's shoulder and said, "I'm sorry, you needed a 75 to pass and you got a 74. There's nothing I can do about it." My friend sat there in shock and asked the teacher if he was serious. Said his parents were going to end him and what he could do to try to pass the class to graduate. He even started hyperventilating and crying a little bit. After a little while, the teacher stood up and told him, "I was just kidding. You passed it by 1 point." My friend, once he got over the shock, became angry at the teacher and asked him why he would want to get him so upset. The teacher said, "I dedicated my life to teaching and wanted you to experience just a taste of the frustration I feel every night trying to teach kids who don't want to learn." Then he walked out of the room and we sat there in silence. Oh, Jesus Christ, that's a third-degree burn. Story 2. So my 7th grade math teacher was awesome. He had a huge booming voice which you could hear 4 halls down. He had taught us fractions while cracking jokes about numbers being top-heavy. He had a weekly test in golden paper that he called a golden rod, which he would whip out of his pants in front of the class. He carried a giant ruler around all the time that he would slap on the desk of anyone dozing off. He was great. Anyway, there was a kid in the class who was kind of obnoxious, but he was also really good at math. He would let everyone know it most of the time, so he's sitting in the back corner of the class just messing around. My teacher was at the front of the chalkboard and noticed him not paying attention. In the next question, he asked the kid in the back directly what the answer was. He answered 10 billion or some other stupid number that had nothing to do with what we were studying. My teacher asked him if he thought that was really the answer. He said no. He then asked him why he gave that stupid answer instead. He said, "'Cause I felt like it." So my teacher asked him to stand up. He did. Then he calmly reached down, rubbed the chalk eraser into some chalk dust at the bottom of the board, and then chucked it right into the kid's face. There was an explosion of dust, and the kid started gagging and crying. He was covered in dust, and there was an outline of an eraser on his forehead. Before the kid could respond, my teacher calmly asked him, "Do you know why I did that?" The kid choked out a no. My teacher shouted in that huge booming voice, "'Cause I felt like it." He was one of my favorite teachers, and that was one of my favorite moments from school. Story 3. Back in boarding school, I was very close friends with this dude called Raj. Name changed. What do I say about Raj? There's so much to tell. First of all, Raj was a heavy hophead, the kind that endlessly plays Dota all night after blazing a few at the stroke of dusk. He would have a few rounds of intimacy through the night when his girlfriend woke up, but mostly rushed through the act with one eye glued to his laptop. Then, when dawn struck, he would make his way out to the base of a hill and sip Imperial Blue whiskey out of his South Sudanese roommate's red Manchester United thermos with a gold flake cigarette. That he probably stole from me. In his hand a couple of minutes before class to perk himself up. He would proceed to enter the academic quadrangle, stinking of cigarettes, alcohol, grass, and sweat from not having showered in weeks. At least when he bothered to show up for class anyway. This was back in high school, by the way, so picture a seedy 15-year-old adolescent boy behaving like an alcoholic hobo in an expensive private school, and you get the picture. Anyway, Raj made a habit of not showing up for English literature class. Our teacher, let's call him Ryan, was a big-hearted, red-headed, beefy American who had a knack for making everyone howl with laughter at anything he said. He thrived in getting us kids giggling at 7:30 a.m., when we were all bleary-eyed and foul-breathed. He lived for this challenge, and loved sharing his infinite pool of energy with all of us cynical idiot teenagers. Ryan also had a habit of making very inappropriate jokes, but hey, we loved him all the more for it. One day the school organizes an open day for parents to visit. To the shock of everybody from the principal to the cleaning lady to probably himself, Raj volunteered to show the parents around. So we are at English class at the ungodly hour of 8 when Ryan asks the class, as he always did, "Hey, where's Raj?" Usually I'd say that he was sick and or sleeping in, and Ryan would wave away the obvious excuse to customary chortles. But this time I had the pleasure of informing Ryan that Raj was in fact showing parents around the campus. Ryan nearly fell off his seat, but, maintained his cool. Raj walked into class a couple of minutes later, hair disheveled, a thoroughly confused look on his face. Ryan says, "Hey Raj, are you showing the parents around?" And Raj goes, "Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to do that," and looks out the window to see an exceedingly attractive mother walking up to the front desk. His pupils instantly dilate and Ryan latches on in a flash. "Go ahead, Raj. Go for the mom. Go for her. Take her back to your room." Followed by a raucous laughter. "Want to see my video games, Mom? Want to play? Oh, yeah." And he snapped his fingers with the most innocent joy and gleeful smile I've ever seen on any human being's face. Ryan was in splits himself, and everyone had tears in their eyes. Raj slunk out of the room quietly, extremely embarrassed. But here's the best part. What Raj did not realize, and Ryan did, was that there was a rubber stuck to his jeans pocket. He walked around with it all day, and all the mothers did not approve. Is Raj's last name Norris? Story 4. There was this ginger kid in my high school I used to share a few classes with who was basically the class jerk. He used to give lip to the teachers and other students equally, so apart from his little crew of mates, he was pretty much universally disliked. Anyway, one class he was winding up my business studies teacher, a gentleman who was follically challenged and had a rather shiny bald head. After several minutes of this kid being a jerk and making comments about his head, we can see the teacher's patience slowly dwindling. He finally snaps when the kid shouts across the classroom to try to get the teacher's attention. "Oi, slaphead!" At which point he swings around and just screams, "Get your ginger short and curlies out of my freaking classroom." Story 5. I had a teacher in high school who would staple McDonald's applications to failed tests. This is the same teacher that when they had a kid fall asleep in class last period of the day, got the entire class to quietly grab their things and go into the hallway, grabbed his own stuff and went out, then loudly came back in the room and turned the lights on. When the kid woke up, the teacher looked at him and went, "Oh, you're still here? Better hurry, school starts in 20 minutes. The look on his face as he sprinted out of the room was priceless. Another one, I had a teacher who was a veteran and Purple Heart winner. When asked by a student what you have to do to get one, he'd say, "It's easy. Stick your head up while they're charging at you." It was really no nonsense, made dad jokes constantly, and was a pretty good guy. If someone fell asleep in class, he would sneak up to the student and slowly lift the front of the desk until it was a couple of inches off the ground and then let it go abruptly. I witnessed that personally. Nothing funnier than a student grabbing the desk in white-knuckled stark terror from the unexpected wake-up. Others said he'd throw erasers for chalkboards at sleeping students sometimes, and I don't doubt it. I don't think a teacher could probably get away with half of the stuff this guy did nowadays, but he always kept us entertained with his hijinks. Story 6. We had this teacher that was like a cooler Gilbert Gottfried, Clyde Dexter Shaybaker. He was notorious for hilarious comments to students and not giving a damn about most academic rules. This was an all-boys high school, so it was pretty much no holds barred. You know that grade confidentiality stuff? He doesn't. "Bomarito, looks like you bombed another one. 62. Acceptable reading material? Nope, we read the rule of the bone. It's basically Catcher in the Rye except way more in breaking and entering." He started to tear up when reading the final passage of the book like it was a memoir of his life, which it probably was, where the main character proceeds to get strung out on a boat off the coast of Jamaica. But by far, my favorite was his retort to this overly self-entitled rich dirtbag in my class, who just so happened to have a big head both figuratively and literally. "Mullet, quit freaking talking in my class. Swear to God, you look like the bottom head of a totem pole. Look at everyone else. Are they talking? Christ, you could be the poster boy for birth control pills. If you don't want one of these, take these." Same kid, Mullen, different class. This teacher was known for his quite aggressive teaching. He would pace between the rows of desks, swinging what he called a Liberty Stick, which was a 2-inch thick, 3-foot-long bar of oak. When he'd ask you a question, he'd swing the stick in your direction, sliding through his palm and would catch it when it was about an inch from your nose. Also, if you fell asleep in his class with your head on the desk, he'd smack the bottom of the desk with a stick. Hurt like hell. Mullen's time with this guy was priceless. "Hey Mullen, why aren't you taking notes?" "I'm just gonna read the book." "Oh yeah? Where's your book?" "I said, home." "At home, eh? Well damn, guess I'm just wasting your time. Since you've got this all figured out, why don't you go study in your own time? You can leave. See you December 7th for the midterm." "What? Get out of my classroom. See you on the 7th. The kid tried to switch to another class, but after the story of how this went down got around, the school wouldn't let him switch. God, I loved private school and their own rules. God, I freaking hated that kid. Man, I would be pissed with that last one. I never took notes because they did nothing for me. It was the discussions that cemented my knowledge. I would have been screwed. Anyway, since you're already halfway through the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you wouldn't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Story 7. My dad was a high school teacher about 30 or 40 years ago. He was pretty young, so his students felt pretty comfortable around him and felt comfortable messing with him. There was this one student who decided to put a tack on my dad's chair before he came in one morning. My dad noticed it before he sat down and decided to keep standing. A few minutes into class, that kid got called to the office. My dad took the tack and put it on the kid's chair. When the kid returned, the other students were able to hide their snickering pretty well. He sits down and immediately jumps about 6 feet in the air. The class bursted out laughing. My dad always wins. Another one. So we had a teacher in 7th grade who was known for being very monotone, strict, boring, etc. She really wasn't the type to interact with 12 and 13-year-olds in a way they could relate to. Looking back, I feel like she might have made a better high school teacher. We'll call her Mrs. Strict. One day, some kid was making a joke, pretending to brush his teeth, and Mrs. Strict told him to get out of the classroom immediately. With cunning juvenile wit, the kid replies, "Your mom." Without skipping a beat, Mrs. Strict replies in an elevated tone of voice, but still monotone, "Excuse me, young man. Your mom." The class roared in a series of oohs as the kid hangs his head in shame and walks out the door. Thanks for being awesome, Mrs. Strict, even if your students don't appreciate it in the moment. Lastly, a popular and controversial Hispanic teacher who was known for his entertaining and informal style of teaching told the class that they put serial numbers on everything now, even rubbers. A tough, street-looking guy with a chip on his shoulder pipes up and says, "BS, I never seen serial numbers on a rubber." Teacher replies without missing a beat, "You know what, I'm not surprised. See, you have to roll it out a few inches more than you will probably ever need to." We were rolling in the aisles and our government teacher just played it off with a straight face and went on with class. That was my second favorite class at Richland Community College. Story 8. I am the teacher. TA, actually, in this situation, so I'm hardly objective. Not exactly a rumor. Actually, it was, apparently, but I didn't know at the time. Whatever. Let me just tell the story and you'll get it. In high school, I was a geek of many types. Computer, band, and drama. All my favorite activities. By senior year, I had been doing drama for 4 years, so I offered to TA the freshman drama class with my spare period. Seniors got a spare period if they had enough credits otherwise. It was, all told, pretty fun. Made me realize that even if I was not nearly as responsible as many of my same-year peers, I sure as hell had my head screwed on tighter than I did as a freshman. Generally, what I did as a drama TA was manage the freshmen while the teacher was off pulling up plays, doing research, whatnot. The teacher was quite aware the freshman year drama might attract people looking for easy A's and or people who had no actual acting talent whatsoever, so while the class wasn't super easy, she did set the minimum bar pretty low for what you had to do in order to pass the class. What I'm trying to say is that for the kids who just didn't have the talent or the interest, literally all we asked them for a given play was to memorize at most 10 short lines and repeat them on cue. Emotion optional. So it's near the end of the year and we're rehearsing one of the final, maybe the final, can't remember, performances of the freshman drama class. Generally, the class manages itself, and I'm mostly there as the guy who has the script and will remind you what your line is. I say mostly because there are still the bad eggs, like you get in every class. In this case, out of the class of 30, there are 3 students who not only give a damn, perfectly acceptable, they are offended that they are being required to even show up, much less put any effort towards the class. One of these students was a particular problem for me. I literally cannot remember her name, but she was the ex-girlfriend of an underclassman football player who decided to give drama a shot during his junior year. He took drama and liked it. She tried to follow him, but in the process of taking a drama class, he hung out around enough functional human beings to realize she was a horrible person and broke up with her. Thus, by the time the end of the year rolled around, she had zero interest in actually completing the class and was mightily offended that she was being required to, speak 3 or 4 times during the 1-hour performance we had planned. She was already a morose enough person as it was. This was the late 90s and she was heavy into a particular look. But after Everett, the football player, broke up with her, she became massively bitter atop the depression. Just what a first-time TA needs to deal with. Yay. Blah. So, that all in mind, it's early afternoon. I'm overseeing yet another rehearsal of this performance, and we're at the scene where Shallow McWitchy, the aforementioned problem student, is supposed to be present in the background, not speaking, along with the 2 other problem students. I'm running the other freshmen through lines, and the whole damn time, McWitchy's chattering with her fellow low-interest students. Now, to be clear, I didn't have a problem with people talking with each other so long as it didn't interfere with the rehearsals. This was not that. Their chats were becoming disruptive, loud enough to make it hard to hear lines. The scene's nearly over though, so I just let it slide. That is, until it gets to the single line that McWitchy and her 2 friends are supposed to deliver in unison. The cue comes and they miss it. Okay, not a problem, hardly unexpected. I feed them all the line and they flub it. I give it again, all 7 words of it. Only one completes it successfully. I give it again, and McWitchy kind of waffles and sits down without actually saying it. Yeah, no, that's not cool. I say the line again, and McWitchy says, whatever, then pointedly ignores me, going back to conversation with her other slacker friends, and that's when it happens. Now you remember I said she was into a particular look. Dark makeup under her eyes, kind of grungy and revealing clothing, and very pale skin. She also had a habit of sitting with her arms crossed, almost as if she was cold or shivering. Perfect, almost smackhead look, in other words, which is what prompted me to say in my nastiest voice, "Look, you can come down off of smack on your own time, but right now we're running lines, so stand up and say your damn line." Suddenly, everyone in the class does that thing you usually only hear on Jerry Springer and the like, that ooh noise, which roughly translates to, oh, you didn't just say that. At this point, I'm confused. I mean, it was a bit of a biting comment, but I didn't think it was that much of a dig. There's this awkward silence for a few seconds, and Mugwitchy gets up and half-heartedly says her line. Well, no, she kind of screws it up still, but it has all the words even if they're in the wrong order, so I'll let it slide and move on. Still, the class reaction bothers me. The next week I'm in class and Everett happens to be there. I sort of say hi to him when he unexpectedly brings up the incident with Mugwitchy. I'm confused. I mean, I thought he broke up with her, so why would he care? Well, turns out there's a reason. As it happens, one of the reasons he broke up with her was because she was an actual substance dependent. Yeah, seriously. That particular look, not actually a look, just the result of a vaguely competent schoolgirl trying to look attractive while having to go through withdrawals during school every day. Anyway, Everett goes on to tell me that my comment kind of scared the crap out of her. She thought she'd been managing, though she'd hidden her dependency reasonably well. She figured a few people in her class would catch wise, but the fact that I noticed, I had a reputation as being somewhat oblivious, but the fear of got into her, resulting in a panicked and half-intelligible call to poor Everett. Now beyond that, I'm not sure what happened with her. She didn't drop out of school or anything, nor did she suddenly seem less angsty and witchy. She did show up for the performance and did deliver her lines, woodenly. But beyond that, I couldn't tell if she actually got clean or not. The only thing I can say for certain is that for the rest of the year, I had a reputation with the underclassmen as a friendly, happy-go-lucky guy who would utterly and completely destroy you in your sense of self-worth if you pushed him too far. I did little to dispel that reputation. God, the coincidence is crazy. Story 9. In my senior AP English class, we used to play a version of Jeopardy! Questions were valued 1 to 5 points, before big tests and efforts to win extra credit points. The class would be divided into 2 teams, alternating players question by question. About halfway through the game, we get to this kid. We'll call him David, who's Korean and likes to miss class a lot. Our teacher, the king of sass and throwing shade, loved to pick on him. Since it's halfway through the game, a lot of the higher value questions are gone already, so David picks a 3-point question. Our teacher says, "Playing it safe, huh?" David replies, "Well, compared to all the other ones up there, it's pretty big." Without missing a beat, our teacher said, "I bet you have to tell people that a lot, huh?" Entire class flipped out. Story 10. My teacher was a bit sarcastic and would often joke with us. Both of these were about me, but I love them. Number 1, what is the difference between you and a calendar? A calendar has a future. Number 2, me reading a Snapple cap. Huh, the average human dream lasts 30 seconds. Teacher, oh, you make it too easy. Me, what do you mean? Teacher, if the average human dream only lasts 30 seconds, why are you still thinking of going to college? Jesus Christ, that last one was crazy. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.